Hello and welcome to the Microfocus Inspire Climate Action Panel. I'm Sarah Atkinson and I'm the Director of Environmental, Social and Governance here at Microfocus, and today I'm going to be your host. I'm delighted to be joined by three tremendous panellists. First, Zubin Randeria, who is the ESG leader and partner at PwC. Yannis Mangos, who is Chief Technologist for our International Strategic Alliances team at Microfocus, and Peter Ellis, who is the Global Director of Natural Climate Solution Science at the Nature Conservancy. So at Microfocus, our purpose is to deliver mission-critical enterprise software that powers the digital economy. We continue to put sustainability at the core of everything we do, and whilst of course we are making progress in this area, there is always more to do and more to learn. We recognise that ESG is a growing area of importance to our customers and partners, to the financial markets, to governments, and of course for our planet. So today we are going to explore the role of the IT industry, how organisations are incorporating sustainability into their business, and the role of non-profits and nature in addressing the climate crisis. So first of all, let me go to Zubin. Zubin, can you help us set the scene a little bit, really, in terms of what you and your customers are seeing regarding ESG and climate action?
Sure, Sarah, and lovely to be here. I wonder whether we just stand back and, there's a lot of noise around ESG. Lots of companies are talking about net zero and climate and stuff like that. We just stand back and understand why this is happening. And if I bring it to life, last month, the second biggest pension scheme in Holland, which is the pension scheme for healthcare workers, one pension scheme with 268 billion euros under management. They have written to their investee companies and have said, basically, you've got 2 years to come up with credible climate transition plans, otherwise we will take action. Now, why are they doing that? Is if you're a long-term investor, if you're a pension fund saving money for 40 years before that money needs to be paid out, then these pension funds and insurance companies are seeing climate risk in particular is impacting their long-term investment returns. So then they're looking at this from the perspective of how do I manage risk? And therefore we've seen a number of big pension funds, for example, the BT scheme in the UK, second biggest pension fund in the UK, has said we need to be net zero by 2035 because it's a risk management decision. Now, if you understand that, then you can understand how if long-term money is moving its money, those are the investors behind the companies that we see making these commitments because they're getting investor pressure. Okay, and those companies then are making demands through their supply chain. And if you stand back, because the majority of long-term money is the bulk of the capital markets, there's about $160 trillion of capital in the economic system. We see over the next 10 to 15 years about 100 trillion moving under this agenda. And if you just imagine, therefore, the weight of money that is going to be flowing out of some industries and flowing into other industries, and the demands of investors and lenders around the equity and credit markets, you now start to understand why organisations are having to respond to this and make commitments to make sure that they retain these investors on their shareholder register. Because from an organisation's perspective, long-term money is the cheapest money. Unless they retain long-term shareholders on their shareholder register, those shareholders will trade out, and then shorter-term shareholders will trade in, and they will come with a higher cost of capital. For the same earnings, that high cost of the capital will deplete their share price. And therefore, this is how we are seeing our clients and organisations framing actually the business case for change, because it's absolutely critical, because it's a value-driven agenda driven by long-term money. The pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds.
Fantastic, thank you. That certainly frames it out for us. So before we dive in and start to look at the role that technology can play, Peter, this isn't just about doing the right thing for the environment as well, is it? It's about equality. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, part of this conversation, an important one. So I think that there's something very particular about the climate crisis and how inextricable it is from issues of global equality. in that there are two sort of facets to that. If you look at the cumulative historic climate pollution by country, my country, the United States, is responsible for a quarter of that. And then if you add on another 22 of the richest, most developed countries, it's about half. So the rest of the world, 150 plus countries, are responsible for the other half. So we in the developed world have an outsized responsibility to be able to come to solutions. And I hope we can get back to the solutions in a minute. But staying on the problem side, if you look at the climate impacts, it's the inverse, sort of almost by crazy circumstance, it's the inverse situation where the least developed, poorest countries and communities are the ones that stand to be and are already being adversely affected by dramatic climate impacts of floods and droughts and famine. Countries like India and Bangladesh and most of Africa. So we cannot deal with this climate problem without also directly addressing issues of global equity.
That's lovely. Thanks, Peter. So we're going to come back to you shortly to go into a bit more detail about the role of the Nature Conservancy. But Giannis, let's now talk about the role that IT can play in helping address the transition to a low or even no carbon world.
So, Sarah, information technology does play a strategic role in the transition to low or no carbon operating model. Over the years, we have seen paradigm shifts in information technology delivery that have improved the way that IT services are consumed. We moved from separate physical systems to virtualized systems to cloud computing, allowing for workload density, higher utilization of computing resources, and greater flexibility and responsiveness in workload fluctuations. In addition, IT organizations are consuming ever-increasing services from SaaS vendors who employ colocation and or multi-tenancy to achieve increased density. Hardware vendors have done their parts as well. Advances in hardware design and concerns about the energy efficiency of the computing assets has had an impact on the environmental footprint. Have we been doing all that is possible to strive for a low or no carbon world? Despite all those gains, unfortunately, at the same time, we're constantly increasing the services being consumed, sometimes without rationalization. And although we have improvements, in a sense, what we have done is, if you allow me to say so, kick the can down the road, pass the problem to someone else. In the drive for becoming green, cloud and colocation data centers consume disproportionate amount of electricity, many times from renewable sources, sometimes antagonizing other beneficiaries of renewable energy, such as residential consumers. This kind of burden has forced regulators to look at the greening of IT from a more holistic perspective and work on updating regulations to this extent. An example of that is the recent decision of the Dutch government to halt new hyperscale data center projects until new regulations can be published. Alas, information technology can help in these areas too. Action is based on knowledge, and you don't know if you can't measure. So it is important to establish a detailed understanding of your IT environment, your needs and usage patterns, and automate in order to utilize computing assets based on demand.
Great, thank you. And can you give us a sort of an example, I guess, really, in terms of how Micro Focus has helped a client or an organization reduce their environmental impact?
We'd be more than happy to do that, but it's difficult to single out one Micro Focus offering without doing disservice to our extensive portfolio. However, a couple come to mind. Let's take a data center consolidation example. Making any large-scale changes to the data center requires detailed knowledge of what exists and how it is interconnected. Many projects rely on manual discovery, spreadsheets, and tribal knowledge to create maps that reflect the infrastructure topology. This approach is time-consuming, expensive, and can be error-prone. Micro Focus approaches this issue in a data-driven, intelligence-based way. Servers are not treated as infrastructure elements, but as a social network. They are considered as social network members, and network traffic as conversations they have with their friends. Utilizing information from configuration management systems like Microfocus UCMDB, we can identify servers with no friends in the network, the so-called zombies. Servers that their functionality and value to the organization is at best questionable. Recently, we assessed the data center of a large company and looked at 725 of their servers in use. We identified that 30% of them, a typical statistic, were zombies and could be decommissioned without disrupting operations. That led to approximately 1 gigawatt hours yearly electricity savings alone for the customer, not taking into account the potential savings from other sources. Another culprit of increased environmental footprint is data lakes. Data lakes have evolved the last few years as valuable tools for gathering relevant information for business insights and applications. However, they pose a unique challenge as they combine large amounts of structured and unstructured data and usually reside in highly distributed systems with inefficient access methods. With vertical and vertical SQL on Hadoop, Microfocus offers big data analysis solutions that natively access both data lake and Hadoop data with breakthrough speeds without requiring any data duplication. Using compression techniques on the hosted data storage needs for the big data environment are reduced further. Less hardware resources are needed, while customer experience and an increase in performance. But we're not doing this just for our customers. Microfocus itself embarked on a consolidation effort to streamline our data centers, and we utilized our solutions in the process. As a result of this project, 51% of equipment and associated workloads were relocated to other Microfocus data centers, while the remaining equipment was decommissioned and disposed of sustainably. That resulted in a reduced energy consumption by 4.5 gigawatt hours per year, and for us, also $3 million in annual savings on rent, fees, and energy costs. So you can see the value of our products.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a lot to digest there, and obviously, if you're interested in learning more, obviously do have a look at the website. But technology obviously has a huge role to play here. But Peter, now let's turn to the Nature Conservancy. Tell us about the work that you're doing to address the climate crisis.
Great, thanks. Well, first, I totally agree with Diana. As a scientist, we cannot know anything about things we don't not measure, not able to measure, and we desperately need technology and efficient technology to be able to do that. But I want to step way back for a minute and think about the technologies we need to leverage if we're going to face the greatest challenge civilization has ever faced with reality. So we at the Nature Conservancy are excited about a much more ancient technology. It's actually about 3 billion years old, and it solved the same crisis we're facing now. That is too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere a number of times throughout Earth's history. And it is incredibly innovative. It's gone through 3 billion years of research and development and was deployed a few 100 million years ago into a really interesting prototype that self-replicates across most of the surface of the Earth. And it's behind me right now. So that technology is called photosynthesis. It captures carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and it stores it in materials that other species on Earth use for all kinds of things. We use them for our own houses, for example, and wood. So we actually did some research at the Nature Conservancy about 5 years ago to look at how much that technology we call natural climate solutions, utilizing plants and soils to bring carbon back into the place where they belong. How much could it help contribute to fighting climate change? And the answer surprised us. About a third of what we need to do to avoid climate crisis comes from changes in land stewardship actions on the ground. How we manage forests, wetlands, grasslands, and agricultural lands. So we call those stewardship activities natural climate solutions. But to return to your earlier question and try to sort of think about this more positively and think about a solution set here, the interesting thing about the equity question is that it's the same disadvantaged rural communities that are most adversely affected by climate and have contributed less historically, that are the ones that have the greatest agency to mobilize natural climate solutions and create those innovative new stewardship activities of land management. So that's what we're doing. And technology, human technology, is indeed a part of that. We are working on an exciting new data product called the Actionmapper that will be an open source web-based platform that will pull together all of the best science on existing and potential future land stewardship actions so that decision makers, investors, practitioners can make informed decisions with the best data about how we can actually leverage natural climate solutions to the climate crisis.
Excellent. And these new resources, when will they be available, Peter?
So we're planning on releasing a beta version of the Actionmapper at the upcoming COP in Egypt in November to a select group of beta testers to get feedback, and then there'll be a formal release in the following COP a year from then in November 2023.
Okay. And then one final question for you is, we see non-profits have a huge role to play here, particularly in their partnerships with corporates. Tell us a bit more about how that's working.
Yeah, thanks. I think the constellation of nonprofits and on-the-ground partners that are really important, that we really, at the Nature Conservancy and other key partners, want to see ourselves as an opportunity to work directly with the folks who are at those front lines of land stewardship activities and create a learning network and an information network for them to be able to start getting work going on the ground and then feed that back into a system that allows us to learn rapidly, because we don't have time for, very involved long-term research projects. We need to actually start doing stuff now and then be able to learn from it. So I think because global environmental NGOs like the Nature Conservancy have a broad footprint, we work in over 70 different countries with hundreds of projects around the world, we want to actually build that network. And it's interesting, I think information technology is really going to be important for that feedback loop, that we can learn as we go. We need to learn, be able to make mistakes, but be able to integrate those learnings in immediately. And so that's part of what we want to try to do with this Actionmapper product too.
Excellent, thank you. And now I'd like to go to Zubin. Tell us a bit about what PwC is doing today to help organisations, and what's your advice really for those who've not yet started on this journey?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Let me bring it alive with a real-life client example. We're working with a multinational organisation. For the last couple of years, we've been helping them manage their cost base. And we've been doing that by working with each of the functions in the organisation, working out what their cost baseline is, and then working up business cases to take cost out in partnership with each of the functions in the organisation. This organisation has now realised that it needs to change given the changing investor demands that I touched upon before. And what we're doing is we're doing exactly the same as we did with the cost out programme, but you cross out cost and put carbon, and we're helping them on their net zero transformation. What is their baseline of carbon emissions through not just themselves, but we've had to look through their supply chain, and then working in partnership with the organisation and each of the functional capabilities. What are the decarbonisation levers that it can pull, and then how it needs to go and execute that and then report it, because it needs to report it, going back to what we've been talking about before, what gets measured gets done. You then need to hold yourself accountable to your investors. The reason why I just shared that example is sometimes when we talk about this, it's like a problem so big that where do we start? We're all stuck. We feel a bit helpless. I'll put my coffee cup and separate the plastic from the cardboard and put them in the right recycling bin, and I think, is that really going to make a difference? What I'm saying is actually what we're talking about here is business transformation. If it's business transformation, maybe for a different end game. In the example I just gave, it's around carbon emissions, not cost, but it's exactly the same thing. Getting your baseline, defining a strategy, operational execution, and then reporting. And we as organisations do that time and time again. We are used to it. And part of this is engaging your organisation on its role on that journey. And we've been talking about the role of technology. I think the role of technology is absolutely critical. What we're seeing here is, for example, just take the problem of looking through your supply chain at carbon emissions or water usage or whatever metric you're talking about. It's really hard, isn't it? But technology has an absolutely critical role to play in ingesting data, storing data, reporting data, transferring data through that supply chain. And therefore, I think the solutions of tomorrow will be quite different from the solutions of 20 years ago, which may have involved questionnaires and clipboards type thing. The solutions of tomorrow will involve common data models transferring data through the supply chain. So there's an interesting comment from Larry Fink, chairman of BlackRock. He made a comment in his investor letter this year, which said, like, the next 1,000 unicorns aren't going to be the search engines and the online marketplaces. The next 1,000 unicorns are going to be those businesses which are going to produce green cement or produce global mobility solutions with driverless cars and all that. These are technology solutions that solving these big problems that the companies are going to need to maintain their investor confidence and maintain investors on their shareholder register. So to answer your original question, Sarah, there's a whole load of stuff that we're helping our companies do, our clients do, but it's essentially around transforming to a cleaner, well-managed, good destination. Because if we get the right amount of capital allocated to those clean, well-managed, well-run companies who are doing good in the world, then the sheer weight of economic value in the capital system will have a force for good rather than a destructive force.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Now I'd just like to ask everyone just to close with one message for our audience. What's the one thing you would like to leave our audience with today, whether it's an act that they could do differently, whether it's something they need to think about in their work lives or in their private lives? Peter, let's go to you first.
Yeah, I'm going to take one from our chief scientist's playbook, Catherine Hayhoe. If we want to be serious about the climate change problem, the simplest thing we can do is what we're doing right now, is talk about it and come up with solutions through good conversation and centralize these important sustainability and climate issues into conversations about how we do everything.
Thank you. And Giannis?
What I'd like people to remember is that carbon footprint reduction is a journey specific to each organization, but IT can be an enabler due to the efficiencies in IT itself that we can get, as well though at its contribution to more efficient business processes.
Great, thank you. And Zubin?
All I'll say is be optimistic. Yeah, what I've just described at the end, this is a massive problem. It's probably the greatest problem mankind has ever faced. We need to solve it quickly, otherwise we have a big problem. But if we're optimistic about it and bring tried and tested business transformation processes with technology, this is a problem which is eminently dealable. And therefore, think about this not as a dark art or a problem for somebody else, but own the problem, because we've all got the capability to contributing to the solution.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of our panelists for being with us today. And if you'd like to learn more, please do visit our website, microfocus.com. Thank you.